According to Christianity Today, Black Christians in America are lining up to support Kamala Harris for the presidency. Today we'll talk about the reason. Plus, liberals and leftists have decried the infamous Project 2025. What is it? And why is Donald Trump distancing himself from it? Is it the fascist playbook it's been made out to be? Stay tuned to find out. We've got all this and more today. I'm Blake Watson, and this is We the Free. One of the best ways you can help our show, other than by sharing today's episode, is by picking up some We the Free merch at wethefreeshow.com. You can be the salt and light you are meant to be by wearing the Salt and Light shirt, or by sipping your coffee from the Salt and Light mug, or you can sport the God Bless America shirt and the We the Free crest tee. We've got stickers and a Smells Like Freedom candle, so check out our merch today at wethefreeshow.com. Welcome to the 44th episode of We the Free. Listen, I want to begin today by thanking you all. Today's episode is the anniversary episode. We've officially been doing We the Free for 1 year, and it wouldn't have been possible without the freebies. You all got this show off the ground, and you've stuck around to support it. It means a lot. We've grown from just a small group of supporters and donors to just about 800 of you watching and listening every week. I've heard from several of you, and I'm so grateful to hear how the show is motivational and informational, that you're able to engage in political conversation better, and that you're more confident in speaking up on the central issues of our time. Some of you have shared with me how the show has made a spiritual difference in your lives. That means so much to me, and it makes it all worth it. I've got some changes coming soon. I intentionally did not change anything about the show for its first year. I think you'll like what comes next, but until then, we have a lot of work to do to improve the condition and health of the Christian church and of the United States of America. So strap in, bring others along for the journey. If God is for us, who can be against us? This week, Christianity Today wrote an article titled, "Black Christian Leaders Find Hope with Kamala Harris." The subtitle read, "The Vice President's faith and commitment to issues stirs enthusiasm among the traditionally Democratic voting bloc." And no, before you ask, this was not a Babylon Bee satirical piece. This is an actual article written by Harvest Prude at Christianity Today. Vice President Kamala Harris isn't the type of politician to cite the Bible a lot. Daryl Ford, the former pastor of a non-denominational evangelical church in Atlanta, thinks it might be a good thing. Well, we're off to a bad start. We've gotten used to seeing people who will make Bible quotations and pray for me on a Sunday, then vote to disenfranchise me on a Tuesday, he told Christianity Today. Disenfranchise is an important word there. So is the location of this former pastor's church, Atlanta, Georgia. To disenfranchise someone is to deprive them of their legal rights, but especially their right to vote. As you've surely heard, Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans want to deprive blacks of their right to vote. Did you know that? And what has been the Democrat evidence of such a claim for the last 5 years or so? Long lines on voting day. And get this, requiring someone to show their ID. I know. How do either of those things disenfranchise black voters? They don't. But that's been the talking point for the last 2 elections. And here's the part of this that infuriates me for the black community. They think that you're stupid enough to fall for that falsehood. They also think if they repeat the lie, Trump's a racist enough, that you'll take their word for it, even without ever being shown a single piece of evidence that the accusation is true. I better move on before I get too heated. Ford and many other black Christians say they care about the faith of the new Democratic Party nominee, who is replacing President Joe Biden on the ballot in November, but they're focused more on issues rather than rhetoric. The former pastor says Black Christians support Harris because she has a good grasp on things like criminal justice and health care. Black Christians care about Kamala Harris's faith. What is the vice president's faith? Though Kamala's mother exposed her to her ancestral religion of Hinduism, Kamala and her sister were raised in a Black Baptist church in California, apparently as a way to help the two of them integrate into the African American community there. Kamala's father was not Black by African heritage. He was Jamaican. To this day, it's reported that Kamala is still a member of Third Baptist Church in San Francisco, California. However, calling Kamala Harris Baptist or even evangelical would be like calling Joe Biden Catholic. They can call themselves all they want, but your self-identity doesn't determine reality. The second chapter of James shows us that the authenticity of someone's faith is demonstrated in what they do, saying, faith without works is dead. Jesus told us in Matthew chapter 7 that we will know others by the fruit that they bear. Kamala Harris has never demonstrated in her public works and behavior that she is a woman of faith in Christ. Not to mention all of her policies. All of them are unbiblical, anti-Christian, anti-American, and quite frankly, evil. Just for the record, I don't see any substantial evidence that Donald Trump is a Christian either, even though he says he is one. Saying you are something doesn't make it so. Being like Christ makes you Christian. It's disturbing to see Black evangelical voters falling for the false faith of Kamala Harris, which is probably, unfortunately, simply due to the fact that she's been a member of a Black Baptist denomination in California. I hope that I'm wrong, but that seems to be the basis. They say they're more focused on issues than rhetoric. Well, actually, you're demonstrating the opposite. We're barely 3 paragraphs into the article, and it seems like you're playing the identity politics game. The top issues affecting Americans have literally nothing to do with race, gender, heritage, etc. So what do you mean by the issues? Well, that was that last line where they said criminal justice and health care. Are those really the 2 top issues for Blacks in America? Like, I seriously want to know. If that's the case, please leave me a comment and tell me how immigration, the economy, foreign conflicts, and morality are all not more important. Black clergy across the country report a new enthusiasm in an election year that was previously leaving voters feeling discouraged and depressed. Why? Because it's not Joe Biden anymore? Guys, everything that you're displeased with, Kamala Harris would only exaggerate. She's been vice president for nearly 4 years. It's no secret that she's the most radically liberal politician we've ever had. And that was proven in her time as a senator and when she was campaigning for president 4 years ago. You think that you're depressed and discouraged now? 4 years of a Harris administration would double or quadruple what you feel now. But again, I want you to pay really close attention to what the article centers around. Skin color. African Americans have overwhelmingly supported Democratic candidates since the party threw its weight behind civil rights legislation in the 1960s. Okay, stop right there. That is a bold-faced lie from Christianity Today. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed because of the Republican Party, not the Democrats. And I'm talking about in both the House and the Senate. The Civil Rights Act was opposed by the majority of Democrats, especially Southern Democrats. And you know, while I'm on the subject, Blacks in America were emancipated by the Republican Party after the Civil War, which was fought tooth and nail by the Democrat Party and its close ties with the Ku Klux Klan. Why do you think Lincoln was assassinated? Because he freed the slaves. The President of the Confederacy and nearly all of its leaders were Democrat Party members. Speaking of the KKK, boy, did they ever have a friend in Democrat President Woodrow Wilson. Wilson is the most racist president we've ever had. He was a strong supporter of the newly founded eugenics movement, which in America was heavily aimed at eradicating the black population in America. Nowadays, that's called abortion. Wilson had open racists and segregationists in his cabinet and fired black federal employees. And that's just a short list. How about FDR? Democrat president. A part of the New Deal was the founding of the Federal Housing Administration, which was supposed to insure mortgages, but they denied insurance in and around black neighborhoods. And this is where the term redlining comes from. Does the black community remember Jesse Owens, the world-renowned track star who competed in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin? He didn't just compete. He won 4 gold medals representing the United States right in front of Adolf Hitler, if there ever was a racist. Hitler believed in the superiority of the Aryan race, but here's a black man from America smoking their Nazi butts all over the track. But wouldn't you know, Jesse wouldn't get invited to FDR's White House like his fellow white athletes were. Oh yeah, and FDR, again, a Democrat, also opposed anti-lynching legislation. Lyndon B. Johnson was also a racist and also a Democrat. In 1954, the Supreme Court essentially desegregated public schools in Brown v. Board of Education. A Democrat governor in Arkansas, Orville Faubus, refused to desegregate. So President Eisenhower, a Republican, sent federal troops to integrate black students. In 1983, Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday was made a national holiday by a Republican president, Ronald Reagan. I mean, what else can I say other than for nearly 60 years, the Democrat Party has sought to use blacks for political power. Just listen to these words from Malcolm X. Malcolm X, in April of 1964. The white liberals who have been posing as our friends have failed to solve our problem. The Democrats have been in Washington, D.C. only because of the Negro vote. You put them first and they put you last. Because you're a chump, a political chump. The party that you backed controls 2/3 of the House of Representatives and the Senate, and they still can't keep their promise to you because you're a chump. Amazing how much the history books have been rewritten, huh? Well, the article continues. But having Harris at the top of the ticket has brought a new energy, reminding some of Barack Obama's historic first campaign. It feels like 2008, said Christy Lauren Adams, an ordained Baptist minister who works at a private school in Baltimore County, Maryland. I think there's a similar sentiment happening right now. Well, let's just gloss over the female Baptist minister and come back to the central issue here, race. All that matters to black Christians, according to this article, is that Kamala Harris is somewhat black. It reminds them of Obama's historic first campaign. You see, Kamala is such a historic first, and that's all that matters. Policy doesn't matter. Record doesn't matter. It's all about the color of her skin. And I'll just underscore this again. Kamala is far more politically radical than Barack Obama. Believe me. Check out this next part. According to a recent YouGov poll, nearly 40% of black people say they are enthusiastic about voting this November. 74% say they plan to vote for Harris come November. So 40% are enthusiastic, but 74% plan to support Kamala Harris. That clearly shows me that only a quarter of blacks in America can see beyond the identity politics and focus on what matters for all Americans. Only a quarter of blacks in America realize their community has been taken advantage of for 6 decades. Conversely, this demonstrates that three quarters of the black community has been duped by the Democrat Party, or they've never been exposed to the truth. If they have been shown the light, their rejection of it is due to their victimization and indoctrination by the left. Listen to this. The reason you're seeing the organic response from the black faith community is because she belongs. Matthew L. Watley, senior pastor at Kingdom Fellowship African Methodist Episcopal Church in Maryland, told Christianity Today, "She's one of us, and it's been demonstrated for a long time." The real question here is, what do you mean by one of us? Because Kamala Harris is neither black or a Christian. Look, everybody understands the historical significance of the racial baggage of African Americans, that those people specifically are the ancestral blacks of America. The slaves and the segregated were not immigrants from India and Jamaica. These were African slaves and their descendants. That's who black people are in America. So by historic measures, Kamala Harris is black, and she's born and raised in California, a state which at the time had never had slavery and had comparatively little racist policy and segregation. Kamala Harris doesn't even have the lived experience of the black community that they talk about. In a 2022 speech at the annual session of the National Baptist Convention, USA, the largest traditionally black denomination in the country, Harris connected her faith and politics, crediting her childhood church experiences for giving her a framework for action. "I was raised to live my faith," Harris said. "Marching for civil rights, my parents pushed me in a stroller. That was faith in action." So, Kamala Harris was born in October 1964. Of course, marching and civilly protesting for equal treatment and justice under the law is fundamentally Christian, and that may have happened with her as a baby, but Kamala grew up in Berkeley, California. That's where she's from. However, if we focus on this idea of her faith in action, where has that been her entire professional life? She slept with Willie Brown to get her first gig. She didn't enforce the law as a prosecutor in San Francisco or as the attorney general in California. Her legislative record in the Senate was almost entirely bent towards economic destruction and tyrannical force. And don't get me started on the last 4 years. Unfettered abortion, abolition of citizenship, open borders, rampant crime, forcefully destructive economic policy. If that's her faith in action, I don't want anything to do with her so-called faith, and neither should you. "We're 10 toes down, all the way in," says Gabby Cudjoe Wilkes, co-pastor of the Double Love Experience Church in Brooklyn, New York, which is part of the Progressive National Baptist Convention. "We're not saying this is a perfect person. No candidate is. Kamala may not be leading with her faith. I'm okay with that," she said. "I don't feel like she's dangling it for a vote." Again, I'm going to gloss over the female so-called pastor here and say to Gabby, I know that your Bible translation literally removes text that you don't agree with, but let's set that aside for a moment, pun intended, and think about something. You are fine with someone not leading with her faith. In other words, you're fine with the fact that God isn't the top priority in her life. She's not a woman of conviction. She doesn't follow the teachings of Scripture, especially when it comes to leadership and governing, and she's disobedient to that guidance. But you're okay with that. And why? Oh yeah, because she's black. Kamala Harris doesn't just not lead with her faith. She contradicts it and legislates against it. Wow, what a woman of faith she is. You're pleased with the fact that Kamala Harris isn't dangling her faith for a vote. You know, Donald Trump may very well be doing that with Christians in America, but the difference is that many of his policy positions actually align with Christianity. Isn't that crazy? Some black pastors who are known as theological conservatives have come out in support of Harris too. Dwight McKissick, senior pastor of Cornerstone Baptist Church in Arlington, Texas, and an influential black leader in the Southern Baptist Convention until he left in 2021, praised Harris's superior qualifications on social media. Okay, do you know why Pastor McKissick left the SBC? Because the convention condemned critical race theory. So, you see what I mean? This has nothing to do with policy and everything to do with skin color. Here's what Pastor McKissick said. I believe the energy, synergy, fundraising, volunteerism, and momentum driving and characterizing her campaign is unprecedented in American political history. Kamala Harris represents those who've been rejected among us. The support she's galvanized is amazing to me. What's with all this over-exaggerated enthusiasm and hype? There is no palpable excitement for Kamala Harris, and the polling proves this. You know who has the most energy, momentum, and fundraising? Her opponent. Then there's that line about Kamala Harris representing those who've been rejected among us. If we're playing along with the game here, Kamala is the intersectional candidate. This administration is an unbelievably intersectional government of racial and sexual minorities, which has literally nothing to do with your qualifications for high office. Like, how can you say the rejected among us when she's the vice president? Seriously? Like, some of Biden's appointed, not rejected, appointed cabinet members include a pup handler. That's a person who leads other gay men in pretending to be his sex dogs, a 66-year-old transgender person, and a black lesbian press secretary, just to name a few of the 200-plus LGBTQ+ appointments under Biden and Harris. But yeah, that's a good call, Pastor. He said that while he doesn't agree with Harris on everything, he will personally vote for her. McKissick specifically disagrees with Harris's position on abortion. She's believed to be the first vice president to visit an abortion clinic and has said she supports legislation protecting nationwide abortion access. Well, I'm sorry, but to me and to a lot of you, that is practically non-negotiable. We're talking about protecting the lives of babies, the most innocent and defenseless life there is. Your options are completely unbridled abortion. Anyone can have one anywhere and at any point in the pregnancy, as if that matters. Or the other option is limited abortion. Well, as a Christian, I obviously want to limit that as much as possible, but that doesn't matter either. Why? Because she's black. Harris is not without black Christian critics, though. Some ministers are skeptical of where she would lead the country if she makes it to the White House. I don't feel that sense of hope that I sense that others might, said Walter Harvey, pastor emeritus of Embassy Center MKE and president of the National Black Fellowship of the Assemblies of God. In Harvey's eyes, Harris's positions on social issues are disqualifying. The Democrats have championed some policies that are unbiblical to family, that are unbiblical as it relates to sexuality. And I think it's cost the African American community, he said. This right here represents a fragment of the 25% we learned about earlier. He's right that her positions on social issues and sexuality disqualify her to Christian families. But that's only part of her problem. None of her policies qualify her. None of them. But the glimmer of hope here is that someone in the black congregation sees past the identity politics to the substance of the culture war and political battle. The article ends by talking about Kamala Harris's pastor, Amos Brown. Brown, who was once taught by Martin Luther King Jr. at Morehouse College, is well respected by Black Christians, and many have noted his relationship with Harris. Martin Luther King Jr. would not have supported Kamala Harris, and he would have disagreed with most of you. Why do I say that? Because Martin Luther King Jr. wanted all people to be treated equally and for there to be a colorblind society. He fought and died for equality, not equity, which is what critical race theory espouses, it's what the Democrat Party pushes, and it's what Kamala Harris and her supporters wish to further establish. Equality is a Christian concept because God created everyone equally. That's even what the founders in America believed and enshrined in our Constitution. Equity is the opposite because it necessitates discrimination to provide for equal outcomes. The economic and philosophic term for equity is socialism. Harris has also established relationships with some Black churches in the greater DC area. She has occasionally attended Kingdom Fellowship, the AME church in Maryland, where Matthew Watley serves as pastor. My prayer, he said, is that the party will once again embrace faith as central to its identity as historically it always has. You've got to be kidding me. The Democrat Party opposes faith communities, and especially Jews and Christians, more than ever. Consider how Christians and Jews are derided by Democrats at the state and federal levels of government. It's at an all-time high in America. The Democrat Party isn't just running away from faith, it's running against it. And you all are blindly supporting the candidate who will undoubtedly and evidently worsen the lives of every American. A leader, contrary to the word you loosely follow, and the woman who will race bait you into catapulting into her boss's seat of power. Martin Luther King Jr. would have been sickened by your racialized religion, as are many of your brothers and sisters in Christ today, including myself. Oh, and in case you haven't heard me say this before, this is one of the most blatant examples yet that Christianity today is completely radicalized and non-Christian, undoubtedly anti-biblical. This is a puff piece for Kamala Harris, for crying out loud. Don't waste a second of your time on this spiritually inept magazine. Project 2025 has been labeled a right-wing manifesto, a polling disaster, a draconian blueprint, a devious threat, the new fascist playbook, and something President Trump is distancing himself from. There are headlines all over the place and the vague allusions to this project, but no one seems to be saying anything of substance about it. It's even getting more search queries on Google than Taylor Swift. But does anyone know what it is? Well, we're going to dig into it today, but it can be stated quite simply, actually. Project 2025 is a list of recommendations. Yep, that's what it is. Now, this is a very thorough and detailed list of recommendations. It's about 900 pages long, and it's also known as the 2025 Presidential Transition Project. This was created and led by the Heritage Foundation. We've talked about them numerous times before. This project has united over 100 conservative organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom, AMAC, the Claremont Institute, the Conservative Caucus, Family Research Council, the MacArthur Society, Hillsdale College, Liberty University, MRC, Institute for the American Worker, the NRA, Turning Point, YAF, and a number of state organizations, and more than 400 scholars and policy experts. These 100 plus organizations basically serve as the advisory board for the project, which encompasses four main pillars: policy, personnel, training, and a 180-day playbook. The policy agenda described in their book, Mandate for Leadership, offers detailed policy recommendations for every federal agency. We're going to take a look at some of the main principles here. Also, the personnel pillar is literally a database of vetted conservative candidates for practically every position on the executive branch. The idea being, here are the people we recommend in order to properly execute the recommended policies. It does no good to give all sorts of policy recommendations if you don't have like-minded individuals to carry them out. The training pillar actually provides courses to prepare these recommended individuals for governing. Like, you can clearly see how this is so extensive and about 900 pages long. So you can see how everything's consecutive here. It's ordered. Here are the policies we recommend. Here are the people needed to execute the policies. Here are the training courses and how to prepare them for office. And finally, there's the playbook. Here's how to carry out the plan in the first 180 days of office under a new administration. So that's everything. Well, here's how Project 2025 describes the situation surrounding its negative press. The left has spent millions fear-mongering about Project 2025 because they're terrified of losing their power. And they should be. Project 2025 offers a menu of solutions to the border crisis, inflation, a stagnant economy, and rampant crime. It shows how we can take on China, fix our schools, and support families. But most importantly, it dismantles the unaccountable deep state, taking power away from leftist elites and giving it back to the American people and duly elected president. All of the leftists are desperately trying to hang this around Donald Trump's neck, or the Republican Party more broadly, but unfortunately, neither have anything to do with the project. Project 2025 is a historic movement brought together by over 100 respected organizations from across the conservative movement to abolish the deep state and return government to the people. There's an important word there, and that's conservative. Conservative does not mean Republican. You'll never ever hear me say that I'm Republican. No, I'm a Christian conservative. I want to conserve the institutions God loves, the family, the church, and human civilization. I want to conserve the foundational ideas of America. Most Republicans are the other side of the corruptocrat coin, of which Dems are the opposite side. They're in high positions of government to enrich and empower themselves, and they co-opt movements like the conservative movement or Christianity to promote themselves financially and politically. So take note that Project 2025 doesn't work for any candidate or party. It was stood up in 2022 before any major candidate announced a campaign to assist the next conservative president. Project 2025 is not partisan, nor is it secret. Project 2025 does not speak for any candidate or campaign in any capacity. When the project began to pick up some notoriety and leftists were trying desperately to pin it all on Donald Trump, he said, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who's behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. Anything they do, I wish them luck, but I have nothing to do with them." Project 2025 even reports that the USA Today fact-checked the Donald Trump attribution and labeled it false. They simply pointed out that this has nothing to do with Trump, and it comes from the Heritage Foundation, which is correct. The interesting thing here is that the project is merely going by a new name. It's been around since the 80s. The policy book specifically. The book, Mandate for Leadership, has been regularly published for 40 years. In other words, this is an annual publication for potentially conservative administrations. They point out that the same is true for liberal administrations with organizations like American Progress, who prepared the liberal leftist version of something like Project 2025 for Barack Obama in 2008. Project 2025 says, We will not stop offering ideas to reverse America's decline. Our aim is to restore American democracy of, by, and for the people, not of, by, and for the elites who currently control Washington, which is a more appropriate use of the word democracy that leftists misuse every day. Now, let's begin with some of the lies that have been told about the project, starting with the termination of the Constitution. Here's what Project 2025 says. Project 2025 actually represents an attempt to restore constitutional governance, not terminate it, bringing the administrative state more firmly under the control of the president, whose authority traces directly from the Constitution, could not be further from terminating this quintessential founding document. Another ridiculous lie was that Project 2025 recommends more government power and authority and regulation. In response to that, they said, Project 2025 aims to weaken the bureaucracy that churns out tens of thousands of pages of rules every year. A more restrained administrative state translates into less control over Americans' daily lives, not more. Similarly, opponents have suggested these policy recommendations would gut democratic checks and balances between the branches of government. Here's what they actually believe and recommend through detailed policy. Project 2025 aims to protect democracy by restoring traditional checks and balances between the president, Congress, and the courts. We advocate making the administrative state more accountable by restoring the president's control over the bureaucrats in the executive branch. So I don't know about you, but so far, all of the lies seem like a total projection on behalf of the left. Conservatives, the real ones, want to protect the Constitution, limit government overreach and power, and preserve the equality of the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the U.S. government. Liberals, progressives, and leftists, those are the ones who want to destroy, amend, and change and revolutionize all of these things. In other words, what you'll see as we advance through some of this is that this is mostly the liberals making a scapegoat out of Project 2025. For example, they've said Project 2025 wants to ban books and curriculum about slavery. Well, that's false. The conservative movement wants to eliminate false and fabricated literature about slavery from public schools because it's misleading our children about slavery, our country's founding, and it's further victimizing black children today. Project 2025 doesn't say anything about that. They've been accused of wanting to pack the Supreme Court and lower federal courts with right-wing judges, and the presupposition there is that the Supreme Court is already packed with right-wing judges. First of all, correction. The Supreme Court only has 2 conservative justices, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. The majority of the court is moderate, and the rulings reflect that. But Project 2025 had a great response to this, saying, the only people calling for packing the judiciary are those on the left, who do it every time the Supreme Court or a lower court makes decisions they don't like. And that's exactly what I'm saying. The opposition to this is leftist projection. They've even gone so far as to say that Project 2025's policy recommendations would end civil rights. Like, seriously, you guys? Project 2025's mandate for leadership calls for respecting the civil rights of all Americans, including those who have been censored by the government or had it weaponized against them. Mandate advocates for the end of divisive, race-based, anti-American propaganda in the federal workforce. Now, the project does call for the end of DEI policies in the federal workforce. The last point they make regarding civil rights concerns the issue of capital punishment. Project 2025 calls for its promotion and expedition, as in they want it to be used more effectively. They said, Project 2025's mandate for leadership calls for the enforcement of the federal death penalty where appropriate and applicable, and recommends a future presidential administration pursue the death penalty for the most heinous crimes, including those involving violence and the sexual abuse of children. unless Congress says otherwise through legislation. There is a practical point and a biblical point to be made here. First, if there are not the most extreme punishments for the most extreme crimes, then criminals and the most evil among us will continue to commit those crimes at an ever-increasing rate. That's literally happening today. The death penalty is as extreme a punishment can be. But is it practical? Historically, yes. Capital punishment throughout history was even conducted publicly for everyone to see. The Israelites and other people groups at that time would stone people to death in public. Public hangings were widely used throughout Europe and Asia and North America. Don't forget about beheadings, firing squads, and burnings at the stake. Of course, the Romans publicly crucified in the U.S. for some time utilized the electric chair. And I don't know if you've noticed, but as we've stopped using capital punishment all around the world, and as crime is decreasingly punished, crime levels have gone through the roof. Even the worst of crimes. The point is, child abuse and sexual abuse is abuse and assault against the most fragile and innocent in society, and we must take extreme measures to protect them. The problem is, liberals can't take that slippery stance because it stops at the womb, and quite frankly, many of them are attracted to kids. Biblically, Christ emphasized the importance of protecting children when he said, "Whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a heavy millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depth of the sea." Paul wrote about the role of government against evildoers in Romans 13, 3-4, saying, "For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil." Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God, government is, a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it, the government, does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. On military and veterans, critics have argued this would cut military benefits for veterans and service members, including housing, retirement, health insurance, etc. This is also false, but they do recommend reforms to the VA to improve care. They outline more aggressive recruitment there, faster service, better hours, timeliness, and more. On marriage and family, opponents have claimed the project ends no-fault divorce. That's false, and divorce is not even mentioned once in the project. Another lie that I personally heard before doing any of this research was that they sought to abolish any of the marriage equality laws, but this is also false. They said, "The legal recognition of same-sex marriage is not discussed in Project 2025's mandate for leadership. Mandate calls for the protection of faith-based grant recipients who maintain support for the traditional definition of marriage. Mandate also supports conscience protections for those who do not wish to participate in same-sex marriages." In other words, if you receive federal grants, or let's say you run a cake shop, you can't be forced to participate in someone else's legal union, which is great. Project 2025 does not call for a complete ban on abortions, but they do call for the abolition of federal funding for abortions to be replaced by alternatives like adoption. The project says nothing about contraception. It doesn't say anything about in vitro fertilization. Opponents accused the project of condemning single mothers while promoting traditional families. This is stupidly false. Listen to what they actually said. Project 2025's mandate for leadership suggests that a future HHS secretary replace the policies of the Biden administration that promote the LGBTQ+ agenda subsidize single motherhood, disincentivize work, and penalize marriage with policies that instead encourage marriage, work, motherhood, fatherhood, and nuclear families. Can we get an amen to that? Listen to this next one. Project 2025's mandate for leadership calls for the criminalization of pornography production, distribution, and consumption. Pornography has no claim to the First Amendment protection, and its purveyors are child predators and misogynistic exploiters of women. Their product is as addictive as any illicit drug and as psychologically destructive as any crime. I called for this last year. Every bit of what they said is absolutely true. The pornography industry is a conduit for child trafficking and human trafficking. And this is the underlying source for so many, if not all, of the issues that are plaguing our society. Not to mention other advanced civilizations around the world. This isn't just an American problem. They are child predators, rapist harborers, and misogynistic exploiters of women. Pornographers should be treated like drug cartels and drug dealers because they're right. Pornography is as addictive as heroin. It is psychologically destructive, not to mention its effect as a marriage destroyer and a soul destroyer. The amazing thing is that non-Christians agree with me on a lot of this. They can see its destructive, enslaving nature, absent the spiritual considerations. The so-called defenders of pornography say that it's protected by the First Amendment and freedom of speech, as if pornography is an artistic expression or that consenting adults can do whatever they want. And they'll cite Supreme Court cases in their defense. Have you ever heard of the Miller test? There's case law in the United States from Miller v. California from 1973 that established a legal definition of obscenity. The defendant, Marvin Miller, was running a mail order business dealing in sexually explicit materials. These materials were being sent to people who didn't even ask for them, one of which reported it to the police. So Miller was charged in California for distributing obscene materials. He was convicted, but his appeal cited the First Amendment and claimed California's law was unconstitutional. Eventually, the case made its way to the Supreme Court, where they narrowly held his conviction, but within the case, obscenity was given a legal definition. The Miller test from that case has 3 standards to determine whether something is obscene or not. Number 1, does it appeal to prurient interests? In other words, is the intent of the material to cause sexual arousal or appeal to morbid or shameful interests in sex? Number 2, is it patently offensive? Does the material depict sexual conduct in a way that is obviously offensive according to contemporary community standards? And then finally, number 3, does it lack serious value? Is there any redeeming social value? Is it literary, artistic, political, or scientific? Now, I would argue that all pornography is obscene. All of it is expressly intent on appealing to prurient interest or the flesh. All of it is patently offensive, and none of it has any value whatsoever. We're not talking about biology class or a painting of Adam or the statue of David. You know exactly what we're talking about. And Project 2025 is right to call for its criminalization. I could say something here about how freedom doesn't mean you can do whatever you want, not even in the constitutional sense. That's not what the framers meant. I've already proved this historically, philosophically, biblically, and logically in episode 18, The Divine Limits of Liberty. The point here is that true liberty is enjoyed within boundaries. But let's keep moving. The mandate does not call for the abolition of Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. but it does seek to curb the abuses of that system. The project proposes the lowering of drug prices, not raising prescription drug costs. Project 2025 was accused of proposing the abolition of free and discounted school lunch programs. That's false. Here's what they actually propose. Project 2025's mandate for leadership advocates that the Food and Nutrition Service be moved from the Department of Agriculture to the Department of Health and Human Services. Mandate condemns the Biden administration's decision to threaten schools that do not comply with radical transgender policies by taking away their funding for school meals for needy students. What about using public taxpayer money for private religious schools? Well, they said Americans are able to use taxpayer money to choose where they shop for groceries, attain housing, and obtain higher education. Religious schools often outperform public schools, and families should have the choice to send their children to these schools. I agree, and there was actually a recent Supreme Court case that supports this. Don't get me started on the misuse of the separation of church and state doctrine. I've talked a lot about this. I'll link to that episode so you can see exactly what the Virginia Assembly meant in 1786. But this is already the case in a handful of states, and they simply create standards to keep both sides semi-satisfied with the outcome. This normally involves state-issued vouchers being used for private parochial schools like, a Catholic school, for example. I think a logical argument here is, how do you know that your tax dollars, like your dollars, are paying for a religious education? What about the parents who want their kid to go to that school? What about their tax dollars? What about the religion of liberalism taught in public schools? I know lots of parents who don't want to support that garbage anymore. And guess what else the project recommends? Project 2025's mandate for leadership calls for the end of the Department of Education. Since the department was created, educational outcomes have not improved, and the American school system has increasingly fallen behind other countries. Giving more control back to the state and local governments and expanding school choice would improve education outcomes for all Americans, especially underprivileged communities. Some functions of the Department of Education would be moved to other departments, including labor, justice, and commerce. Speaking of commerce, here are some of their recommendations for the economy and workers. Kamala Harris claimed Project 2025 calls for cuts to Social Security. CNN, of all media outlets, fact-checked her on this, saying that was a false claim. The mandate also does not call for the elimination of unions and worker protections. They do propose a conservative labor policy. It calls for combating the excesses of the deep state's bloated federal employee unions, which have ensured that federal employees keep their jobs even if they engage in illegal behavior or perform their jobs poorly. There's also no mandate in this to raise the retirement age or to cut Medicare. Now, entitlement programs will have to face drastic reforms in the near future. But nobody is pushing for that right now. No politician. It's just another one of those cans that keeps getting kicked down the road. What about immigration? Well, they undoubtedly call for mass deportations of illegal immigrants. Project 2025's mandate for leadership supports an orderly and lawful immigration system. It advocates that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office of Removal Operations be primarily responsible for enforcing civil immigration regulations, including the removal of those who have violated our immigration laws. It also calls for additional resources to put an end to Joe Biden's border crisis and enforce immigration laws. So 2 things here. First, libs, take a note. Conservatives don't oppose immigration. We oppose illegal immigration and the consequences of it. What are the consequences of mass illegal immigration? Well, you've witnessed it across the world for about 5 years. Skyrocketing crime, massive strains on resources, the mass importation of drugs and violence, human trafficking, and leeching our public programs like Medicare and Social Security. That's what we oppose. And you're an idiot if you think we oppose immigration. For God's sake, America is not even 250 years old. We are a land of immigrants, and we all know that. You're not going to control the language on this. These are invaders. These are aliens. They're criminals. They deserve to be punished as invaders and criminals, to be removed immediately with no chance of coming back. Now, I could have included this in the economic discussion because the regulation of this industry is the foremost cause of our financial woes in the United States. I've been talking about this all year long. The reason why we're staring down the barrel of recession and economic collapse is mostly due to Biden's economic policy. It's no coincidence that on Monday, as the markets opened to an absolute free fall, Biden's economic advisor resigned from his position. If you're a freebie, what is the industry which affects all other industries in the United States? The oil industry, correct. Well, while Biden gutted that industry and Kamala wants to further stifle our most important industry, Project 2025 recommends the following. America needs energy that is plentiful and affordable. Project 2025's mandate for leadership calls for an all-of-the-above energy policy that would promote the development of our domestic energy supply and for fewer burdensome regulations for all businesses. Wow, really controversial stuff, isn't it? No, it's not really. Now, I'm just giving you the bullet points, really. They go into significant detail in the 900-page document, which you can read for free on their website, project2025.org. In summary, this is an action plan of recommendations for whomever may occupy the Oval Office in November. It's not like any of this is new. Secure the border, finish the wall, deport illegal aliens, defang the federal government by increasing accountability and oversight of the FBI and DOJ, unleash American energy production to reduce energy prices, cut the growth of government spending to reduce inflation, make federal employees and bureaucrats more accountable to the democratically elected president and Congress, improve education by moving control and funding of education from DC bureaucrats directly to parents and state and local governments, and ban biological males from competing in women's sports. I think I just audibly heard some of you shout, amen. I know I did. Now, why is Trump distancing himself from this? Because Trump is currently running an Obama-esque campaign from 2008 to capture as many moderates as possible. Kamala Harris is not even attempting to appeal to the moderates or those on the right. She's radically left in every way. And she's picked Tim Walz, the radically authoritarian governor of Minnesota, as her running mate, who we'll talk more about next week. I think we might play a little comparison game with Harris and Trump, Walz and Vance. That should be interesting. Well, that's going to do it for me. What'll it be next time? We'll see. For now, go and be the salt and light you were meant to be, and we'll see you next time on We the Free. Thank you for watching today. Listen, I want to make sure that you stay informed on the news and the biblical response to it. So do yourself and us a favor and hit the subscribe button before you go. And then we would love for you to check out WeTheFreeShow.com to grab yourself some merch to spread the word about We the Free. And we're also going to put a video on screen that we think you'll like. Now, go and be that salt and light, and we'll see you next time.